in full. You can call it whatever you like, Mr. President. You did leave pretty angry. It certainly wasn't a happy ending. I believe it was a free and fair election and that you lost.
You don't really believe that?
That's my belief.
All right, well, then you're a fool.
However,
then you're a fool.
Maybe I am a fool.
What happens when the guy who once defended Trump now calls him out for his biggest failures? Piers Morgan didn't hold back during their explosive interview, from Trump's infamous disinfectant comment to the January 6th chaos. The moment Trump stormed off, it wasn't just drama, it was the final nail in their friendship. Watch how Morgan torched their so-called bromance on live TV. Before we move on, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video.
Are you going to run again?
Well, you know, for reasons of campaign finance and everything, I'm not allowed to say, but let me just say this. I think a lot of people are going to be very happy. Okay, let's go.
That was a great interview.
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Turn the camera off.
How did Piers Morgan go from being one of Trump's loudest cheerleaders to one of his sharpest critics? Well, the story starts back in the days when Morgan seemed to take genuine pleasure in defending Trump at every turn. During the early days of Trump's presidency, Morgan was more than just an ally. He was practically a spokesperson. No criticism of Trump was too big for Morgan to shrug off. You'd think he was being paid in Trump steaks and MAGA hats the way he went out of his way to praise the former president. He scored exclusive interviews, defended Trump's tweets, and even showed up on TV panels to argue his case against skeptics. At one point, Morgan was like a loudspeaker for Trump's talking points. But then things got weird, even for Trump. Morgan found himself in an awkward position. As Trump's controversies piled up, the defenses became harder to sell to an audience that wasn't buying the whole circus act anymore. And trust me, no sales pitch in the world can make something like injecting disinfectant sound reasonable. You could almost feel Morgan squirming as clips of Trump's wild comments played on air.
Another thing to you, because I've watched this whole debate, Rage, and you've been completely unflagging in your refusal to accept defeat.
That's it.
No, yeah.
Last question 4 times.
No, I realise that. I realise I'm not like.
Very dissent.
I just haven't asked you
You're
about
a very dissent. This was.
Here was a guy who'd gone from confidently defending Trump's policies to nervously trying to explain why the president was casually riffing about bleach as a cure. It wasn't pretty, and it was around this time that the cracks started to show. The real turning point came during the COVID-19 pandemic. This was when Morgan decided enough was enough. As Trump continued pushing dangerous misinformation and downplaying the seriousness of the virus, Morgan finally broke ranks. He went on air and called Trump out for what he described as a complete failure of leadership. Morgan wasn't mincing his words either. For a guy who'd been one of Trump's loudest allies, this was a big deal. He criticized Trump's handling of the pandemic, calling his statements reckless and accusing him of endangering lives. You can imagine how well that went over with Trump world. But if Morgan's decision to criticize Trump's COVID response was like loosening the lid, his next move basically blew the jar wide open.
You know why, though? You know why? Because if our country doesn't have fair and free elections, and if our country doesn't have borders...
Because apparently the promo was rigged. Donald Trump himself issued 2 statements branding it fake news.
After the 2020 election, Morgan did something that might as well have been a declaration of war in Trump's eyes. He acknowledged Joe Biden as the rightful winner. That was it. For Trump, loyalty is a one-way street. And once Morgan stepped off the Trump loyalty train, it was full steam ahead to Grudge City. Morgan's comments didn't just alienate Trump, but also unleashed the wrath of Trump's most devoted supporters. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Morgan found himself under fire, not only from Trump's fan base, but even some corners of his own audience. People who used to see him as a staunch defender of their guy now felt betrayed. But instead of backing down, Morgan doubled down. Over the next couple of years, his criticisms of Trump became sharper and more frequent. He didn't just tiptoe around the issues, he went right for the jugular. By the time 2022 rolled around, the relationship between the two former allies had completely unraveled. The bromance wasn't just over, it was dead and buried. What started as a blip of disagreement had evolved into full-on public feuding. And let's not forget, Morgan isn't exactly great at making friends in the first place. The guy thrives on controversy, and here he had the perfect target. Now, with Morgan adding fuel to the fire at every opportunity, the stage was being set for what would become one of the most talked about confrontations of the year. The cracks had grown into a full-scale chasm, and it was only a matter of time before they went head-to-head in front of the cameras. Morgan was gearing up for his role as the bold, no-nonsense journalist, ready to ask the tough questions that Trump couldn't just brush aside. But would this confrontation end in a fiery showdown or an outright disaster? The footage would make headlines for weeks, but the lead-up to their clash in 2022 started with that moment, when Piers Morgan decided to stop defending Trump and start calling him out. What happens when someone finally tells Trump exactly what he doesn't want to hear? In April 2022, the much-hyped interview between Piers Morgan and Donald Trump delivered exactly that moment.
I believe it was a free and fair election and that you lost.
You don't really believe that?
That's my belief.
All right, well, then you're a fool.
However,
then you're a fool.
Maybe I am a fool.
We don't have a country.
Okay.
We have crooked, corrupt elections.
But here's what I would say to you.
And I've proven it.
Here's what I would say to you. Could I not talk about exactly how our incredible interview finally ended? After all, it's made global headlines.
Marketed as a dramatic showdown between two former allies turned rivals, the interview promised fireworks, and boy, did it deliver. Morgan's producers made sure everyone knew this wasn't just another chit-chat on the Trump media carousel. No, this was pitched as a clash between the once devoted cheerleader and a former president who thrives on loyalty as long as it benefits him. For Morgan, it was a chance to reposition himself as a no-nonsense journalist, unafraid to poke the bear. For Trump, it was an opportunity to either crush that narrative or, well, we all know how it turned out. Right from the start, Morgan made it clear that this interview wasn't going to be a flattering platform for Trump's usual shtick. Morgan wasted no time pressing Trump on the subjects he most wanted to avoid: the 2020 election and the January 6th Capitol chaos. You could practically feel Trump squirm under the questions. When Morgan asked about voter fraud, you could see Trump's usual defense mechanism kick in, changing the subject, rattling off baseless claims, and repeating the greatest hits playlist of his stolen election narrative. But Morgan wasn't playing nice anymore. He interrupted, pushed back, and refused to let Trump dominate the conversation like he does in so many interviews. For a guy used to wielding control in the room, Trump didn't look comfortable. As the minutes ticked by, Trump's frustration spilled over. His reactions became more visibly agitated, his tone sharper, his answers even more evasive than usual. Morgan didn't make it easier for him either. He remained unwavering, plunging deeper into the topics everyone knew Trump couldn't handle. Morgan directly challenged Trump on his responsibility for January 6th, whether he believed his words had fueled the violence. Trump waved it off, spouting vague, tired lines about peaceful protests and ignoring the whole point of the question. At one point, it was almost as if Trump thought if he rambled enough, Morgan would just give up and let him off the hook. Spoiler alert, Morgan didn't. Then came the moment that ripped across headlines everywhere: the dramatic storm-off. By the time Morgan started circling back to his election accusations, Trump had reached his breaking point. Apparently, dealing with real pushback wasn't on Trump's to-do list that day. He snapped, throwing out an insult or two, and stormed off set. And when I say stormed off, I mean he left in peak Trump fashion. Grumbled complaints, a scowl that could curdle milk, and a muttered remark about Morgan being disloyal. The cameras, of course, caught every second of his huffy display. If the interview wasn't heated enough already, the situation escalated even further after the clip of Trump's walkout went viral. Morgan's team knew exactly what they were doing.
In full. You can call it whatever you like, Mr. President. You did leave pretty angry. It certainly wasn't a happy ending. I believe it was a free and fair election and that you lost.
You don't really believe that?
That's my belief.
All right, well, then you're a fool.
However,
then you're a fool.
Maybe I am a fool.
The footage showing an irritable Trump being challenged, stumbling over words, and walking off in a rage was immediately packaged up and plastered across headlines to promote Morgan's new show. For Morgan, this was marketing gold. It cast him as the journalist unafraid to take on Trump when so many others dodged tough questions in favor of access. Trump, naturally, didn't take it well. His team rushed to put out their own version of the interview, accusing Morgan's producers of editing the footage to make Trump look bad. They even leaked audio recordings that showed Trump staying behind to chat casually after the dramatic exit. But let's be honest, once that storm-off clip hit the public, the damage was already done. Morgan, ever the lightning rod for controversy, leaned into the media frenzy, while Trump raged against what he called a deceptive hatchet job. On social media, Trump's avid supporters came for Morgan with full force, flooding platforms with insults and branding him everything from fake news to disgusting. But for Morgan, who had already burned bridges with much of Trump's base, there was little left to lose. By this point, he'd fully shifted away from being Trump's defender into someone ready to redefine himself as a so-called truth teller. And let's face it, the fallout only gave his brand the controversy boost it thrives on. The significance of this moment went deeper than a viral clip. Trump's storm-off wasn't just a tantrum, it represented the total collapse of his friendship with Morgan. Their relationship, which had gone from mutual backslapping to bitter insults, was now beyond repair. Trump, a man known for nursing grudges, burned what little goodwill remained. On the other side, Morgan solidified his rebrand by showing he wasn't afraid to spar with his old ally. Their showdown, awkwardly tense and full of viral soundbites, brought the feud to a dramatic peak and cemented the divide that had been brewing for years. And yet, Morgan wasn't done shifting alliances. If one thing was clear, it was that this confrontation would open up new opportunities for the outspoken host, but more on that later. Piers Morgan didn't just challenge Trump for the sake of political principle, it was a survival move. As support for Trump became more of a liability, Morgan rebranded himself as the bold truth teller who dared to rattle the man once deemed untouchable. The fallout wasn't just personal, it launched Morgan into a media spotlight that rewarded controversy over loyalty. But here's the real question. Does this feud prove how fragile political alliances are, or just how transactional? While Morgan's reinvention thrives, Trump's crusade against the press rolls on. The real question is, can someone else fill Morgan's old role in Trump's orbit?